Hi, my name is Adam Aarons, Senior Consultant with Experts as a Service at Analysis Prime. Today I want to talk about the changes to SAC regarding planning actions being moved to the file directory or repository. So in this video I want to cover the file repository integration with planning artifacts, how this affects the planning actions, and look at a couple of considerations with planning actions now considered a file. So with this change in the latest release, users can access data actions and multi-actions right in the file repository system, like stories or any other file. So what this means for users when they go to the file structure, they'll have a centralized place to manage the actions, and they can utilize repository functions. They can share, delete, move, etc. It allows for sharing access of actions per team or per user, so you have much more granular sharing opportunities. Workspaces can also be used, and the functionality can be used to further segregate and define content. And finally, actions can be organized in the folder structure however it's needed for the user. There are some considerations that we're going to run through quickly. First of all, the data action list when you go into the data actions module of SAC is now replaced with a recent file. So you no longer have a long list of all the data actions, just the most recent ones. There are some considerations in a matrix to consider for role permissions versus share permissions and how they work together, where you need read access and execute access, for instance, to be able to find the data actions and run them. And those that access comes both from role permissions and share options. So file permissions are also important. So first, users need public access. Per role, they just create access and read access as well. But there's also a new function with the migration where it creates new teams that can be assigned to data actions for quick utilization based on the role. And then finally, data actions are now under files. They are no longer under data actions. So when it comes time to migrate, that's where they will be. So once in SAC, everything looks a little bit the same. So we can create a new data action. And the first time you come in, you will see the box letting you know that everything's changed. And so if we create a new data action, and I am creating one for my planning model, and when we would normally go to save the data action, we used to be able to just see that it saves. Now it's allowing us to save it in the directory where it belongs. So if I open up my books for a project, and I can save it however I need to save it per client needs, or in this instance, my own needs. So I can have a data action folder where all of my data actions go. I can subcategorize that data action folder however I might need, or I can save the data actions in a model folder so that if I need to reference it quickly, I know which model it belongs to. I can go back and find it there. A lot of flexibility in filing it however you need to. So I'm going to go ahead and save this data action. So now if I go into that same spot in the file repository and refresh this, I can see that the file is now, the action is now here as a file. So now that it's a file, we have the ability to do whatever we want with it. We can delete this that we just had. We can copy it somewhere else if we needed to use it as a basis to build another one, and we can share it. And there's some interesting some things that need to be considered when sharing files, which we'll go to over in a minute. So as I mentioned, in considering this new move, there's some things within the role permissions that are still important. First is anyone with a data action access needs to have read access to be able to find their own data actions within the file repository. In order to run them, they need execute. And for moving between tenants, update data action update is going to need to be made available so that it can be overridden. And then finally, there are new teams created during the migration. Their system created teams. They start with data action role _ role name, and same thing with multi-action. So these allow data actions to be assigned to teams very quickly right off the bat, and it's part of the migration process. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a consideration about user role versus sharing permissions. So a user role permission that has execute also needs to have read access to the file, to the data action file. So without read access to the file, it can't actually be found and executed. So not having read access will actually nullify the ability to execute within the role permission. And the opposite is true as well. So if you provide someone with read access to a data action, but they don't have execute permissions within their role, they won't be able to run the data action. And another thing to also consider is that any role that does not have access to the public folder will also not have access to any public data actions. So they will need public access in order to use and manage data actions. So to review, multi-actions and data actions are now in the file repository and are treated like any other file, meaning that they have a lot of flexibility to share, delete, and move like you would any other file, story or otherwise. But there are some considerations now that they're using the file system, and that is around permissions and file access permissions. There's a lot to consider, and the blog resources below are a great starting point to read more about all of the various considerations and the new use case.